Everyone, welcome back to another honest review where we try to stay objective about the games we are talking about. I am Stefan JD, aka Cyberpunk Holiday, and here with me today is Jesse Chavez, as usual.
Hello, everybody.
Today we're talking about Silent Hill Shattered Memories, a game that came out originally on the Wii and then was ported to the PSP and PS2. It's kind of one of those games where the fans either love it or hate it. I don't think there's anyone in between, and there's reasons for that. When did you first play this game, Chavo?
Back when it first came out, it was the first game I ever pre-ordered.
Wow. I think I got it, I want to say 3 or 4 years after it came out, because it came out in 2009. And I got it probably 2013, 2012, maybe even earlier, but I didn't know it was a remake or reimagining of the first game.
It was the first time I'd heard the phrase reimagining used for anything, and I picked up on it pretty fast on what it was supposed to be. I won't lie, I was a little disappointed initially that it wasn't a remake. But I think for what it is, the whole story, it serves itself well.
And we're going to get into it. First off, we should note that there was another pitch originally. It was called Cold Fear.
No, Silent Hill Cold Heart.
Cold Heart.
Yeah.
Cold Fear. My bad.
The crossover nobody asked for. No, the original concept so here's how this game went into production. So there was two concepts going around. Konami initially wanted to do a straight up remake for the PS2 generation, because I think they wanted to try to get the first game kind of in line with the aesthetics of the rest of the series at that point. And at the same time, they're at Climax, the studio who had just developed Silent Hill Origins for them. They were coming up with a pitch called Silent Hill Cold Heart, which would have centered around a college student with severe emotional problems who ends up kind of getting lost on her way home and ends up in the town of Silent Hill during a snowstorm. And there was a lot of features. She would have had a cell phone that would have been like her lifeline to the outside world and to other people she runs across in the game. There would have been psychological evaluations that you flash back to, and like depending on how she answers the questions, changes the environment, the enemies, how they attack. It would have utilized the Wiimote so that you would have like had to like grab like melee weapons and like rip them off walls, or like makeshift items. There was even a concept where they were going to utilize the Wi-Fi, where the Wi-Fi feature of the Wii, so you could get like actual local news reports and weather reports on the phone to add realism. It was highly ambitious, and unfortunately, I don't think Climax fully understood the limitations of the Wii at the time, so they kind of wrote a tall order, and the game ultimately ended up getting shelved, but they were able to kind of salvage it and leap it over towards the Silent Hill remake project. And that's how it kind of ended up culminating into Silent Hill Shattered Memories.
If anyone remembers the Wii, like it, for all its gusto, I mean, unless you were a AAA studio, which Climax certainly wasn't, you weren't getting extremely good performance games. I mean, everything about the Wii that we know now is that everything was downgraded, graphics and frame rates sucked. Some games were changed entirely, like the Ghostbusters game was changed into like a kid's version, and it played like garbage. The GoldenEye game on Wii was garbage. There were so many things that should have been good that weren't made by AAA studios, but were owned by them and didn't come out good. And in the case of Shattered Memories, I feel like Climax put in a good amount of effort, but it's an extremely linear game. The biggest thing about it is, going back to the pitch for Cold Heart, is that the game does try to put on this front that it's psychologically taking away from your actions in the game and the narrative and everything you do. And you actually do go through a couple psychological tests with the psychologist in the game, and it'll ask you like very adult things, like if you've cheated on a spouse before, just a numerous amounts of things. But overall,
perfect couples game, by the way. You should totally play it with your
Yes.
boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever.
But overall, it's kind of I was saying to Chavo before we started recording, it's kind of kayfabe, like it's not really that deep.
I still feel like it's pretty extensive in the fact that every single time I've played this game, and I've played it quite a few times now, I have never gotten the exact same playthrough ever. Like the way the lines are delivered by certain characters have multiple different versions of scenes. It's not just like, oh, this one they like you, this one they hate you. It's like, no, this one they're kind of flirtatious, this one they're kind of worried about you, this one they're kind of scared of you, so on and so forth. Like alternate line choices. Characters' appearances do change, the most drastic being Sybil in particular, because she can either be like a leather-studded biker cop or a wholesome small town sheriff out of Fargo or something. But yeah, like there's just like characters. The world changes. The enemies themselves. There's only one enemy type in this game. It's the raw shocks, which is supposed to be a play on the Rorschach test, where they're these kind of blob-like creatures, and their form will change depending on what your playthrough is. Like if your Harry is a bit more like sex oriented, like he focuses a lot on like nude pictures and characters' cleavage and whatnot, the creatures will actually develop breast and like pronounced sexual features like jutting hips and whatnot.
Yeah,
it's weird.
Mine
that I
did
think
have that. I got the one with breasts on them.
yeah. Sometimes they end up being like blocky and incomplete, like they're missing something. They're like a constant overwhelming force. They keep attacking and they pile on you. They don't so much like cut and try to slice and dice you like every other enemy and every other Silent Hill game does. Right. It was a very controversial decision at the time, because I remember that was like people's main griping point. What the fuck? We can't fight back? You know, like you're only supposed to run and there's only one enemy type. I think, again, it really fits with what the story is supposed to be, because it's not about the combat. They really lean hard into that psychological aspect, and it's all connected, you know?
Right. It's kind of hard to know where to start with this, because there's a lot of different things we have to talk about. I think the biggest one, it is a reimagining of the first game, and you do have to take into account that the first game, in my opinion, and I'm going to guess in Chavez too, is a perfect game. I mean, for a PS1 game, it's perfect in everything it does. Its creation, its music, like the settings it takes you to in Silent Hill, the characters, the setups, the motivations, everything. It's a perfect game. It is a PS1 game, so there are certain things of that era that, you know, it got stuck with, but overall, when you come back to this game, Shattered Memories, which is the reimagining, you still do go to those same places in the first game, like the sewers, for instance. But the sewers is a more prominent role in that first game, like Chavo said, because there's no combat in this game. You're just running away from the enemy. So I can see people already on the offset being pissed the fuck off about that. I guess because I didn't know it was a reimagining again, that I wasn't. I just went in thinking like, well, let's just see what this is, because I am a fan of Silent Hill, and I was willing to give it a chance. I had a completely open mind.
Let's kind of start with just the key difference here. Like let's really like split the line between Silent Hill 1 and Shattered Memories.
Mm-hmm.
So at their core, it is essentially the same story. Ryder crashes his car. He loses his daughter. He's trying to chase after her and find her in the town of Silent Hill. That's pretty much where it ends. From that point on, every character we encounter in this game that has a counterpart in the original game, they subvert expectations. They subvert who their role in the original story. It turns everything and kind of flips it upside down. And instead of these characters who are kind of larger than life and part of this bizarre horror story, they're real life people with flaws, and Harry is no exception. Whereas in the original game, he's this, you know, almost superhero, you know, super dad, you know, fucking killing a god, rescuing his daughter. In this one, he's kind of a flawed human being. Like he's still very goal oriented. He's looking for his kid, but like once we get to the end, we discover that, you know, he's not a perfect dad. He's just a human being. And the same goes for Dahlia, who in this version is Harry's actual wife. We come across her, and the game does villain. It plays into the villain side of her just because, again, that's what we're expecting. That's what we know from the original story. But it turns out that she's just, you know, a mom who fell out of love with Cheryl's dad and kind of had to make the choice to end the marriage. And I think where the story succeeds overall is that every character we encountered that we think we know from the original game subverts who they are. Like the roles are all flipped. I'm just curious, did you kind of pick up on that? Like or like how much of a shock was it for you whenever you'd encounter someone who you're supposed to recognize, but they're not who they are?
Right. Well, like a good example would be Dahlia.
Yes.
Like how would you describe her in the first game, Chava?
In the first game, she's an old crone, a hermit. She's, you know, I don't want to say satanic. That's not fair to lump them in on this. She's like a religious zealot.
Yeah, she's like the scary old lady on the block that you know is evil. Like that's what she looks like. But in this game, she's like a punk rocker chick slut that wants to have sex with me every 5 seconds.
Yes. Well, it's funny because she's kind of split between two versions. She's either the slutty punk rocker or she's just straight punk rocker. I guess it depends on how much, again, of a sex factor there is. She does want to bone Harry regardless in either continuity.
Yeah. So like right off the bat, you're like, wait, like it caught me off guard so hard because I was like, wait, what? And I should point out too that I have played the first Silent Hill, but I played it after Shattered Memories. I still knew the lore, but even having not played it till after Shattered Memories when, you know, this game came out, it still caught me off guard. I was like, wait, what? Because I knew the story.
Right. It was a jaw dropper because there was literally a trailer they had. It was like a snippet of the bar scene where it was the trailer they introduced her, and it's like, who are you? And she's like, I'm Dahlia. And that's where the trailer ends. And I was just like, what? Who? How does this work?
You know, Sybil's kind of the same. I mean, generically, she is just still a police officer.
Right. She can either be aggressive or helpful depending on who you are.
Which is kind of funny because in the first game, she's a little above both, I would say.
Yeah, this one she gets kind of more split and into an either or.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I mean, the expectations there in character-wise has already had, like, the kitchen sink thrown at it to spice it up into something different. And then you take, like, the setting of the town, as we all know, is filled with fog town where you can't see anything. There's ash falling from the sky. You know, everything, when you go to nowhere, everything looks like it's rusted metal. It's decayed. It's decrepit. And then in this game, it's fucking winter. It's a winter wonderland.
Yeah, that was another holdover from Silent Hill Cold Heart, although it really works again for the metaphor of the story. I guess I should really get into like the ending so we can fully like examine these characters a bit.
Yeah.
So the big twist is there is no cult. There is no cult in Silent Hill, and the person, because we get therapy sessions throughout the game, and they're initially framed as like a flash forward, like you think it's this therapist talking to Harry about the events of Silent Hill, and it turns out Harry walks through the door behind the therapist while they're talking to the subject, and the person we're playing as is Cheryl the entire time. And it turns out that her dad died in a car crash, and she's been recounting this story to this therapist about how he's been going through hell and back trying to save her. And she's essentially confronted with the reality of, no, her dad died. She didn't actually know him all that well. What we're seeing is, you know, her hopes and dreams and her delusions.
Right. So that's why the characters are also vastly different. And, you know, the big twist, of course, which I didn't see coming. Did you see it coming?
I suspected about around the boathouse, because the way the story goes, like at first, like stuff is plausible enough and you think it's just a guy who's caught in stuff out, he's in over his head, but the inconsistencies keep building and building and building to where I'm like, I have a feeling either the daughter doesn't exist or Harry doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
Something happened here. Because
Right.
he's very displaced from time throughout the game. Like when they introduced the cell phone mechanic, like his phone's ringing and Sybil's like, you can answer your phone, and he's confused. He's like, phone? Why would I have a phone on me? And then he like checks his pocket and he's like, oh, and he's just like so baffled by it. It's like, what the fuck is this?
Right. Right. And that's the biggest thing too, is that even after you realize the twist, that this whole time when you're talking to a psychologist and you're basically the player telling him the narrative of what happened in Silent Hill, I still think that the game is letting you know, though, that even though Cheryl's going through this in some psychologist's office, wherever the fuck, that Harry's spirit or soul, when he died in Silent Hill, is still going on and replaying in these shattered memories in the town while she's recounting the story.
I should clarify a bit. So I don't think it's actually his soul. Like, I think Harry Mason, the actual Harry Mason, is dead. The person we're seeing, the Harry that we're playing as,
Is like,
is
or it's the
a memory.
town. Yeah, or it's the
Yeah,
town recreating him.
it's manifesting Cheryl's idea of who her dad was. And essentially, yeah, I do think some people say it's all in Cheryl's head, but I think it's he's manifested and he's interacting with actual people. Maybe not all of them are real. Like I have a hard time figuring out if Lisa was an actual person or if Michelle
Michelle.
especially.
Yeah, Michelle's the one that's the strangest, because she can come to you in many different ways. Like even the bartender at the bar, I don't think she's real, because she only shows up once, I think, and then like disappears. And she's replaced by Michelle, who Michelle has a boyfriend that she keeps talking about, and they break up and then they disappear. And then when she keeps coming back, she's in different types of clothes and stuff. And the way you meet her, I think, is she's singing at the club or whatever. But it's
No,
just
it's the high school, because
okay. The high school.
you end up
Yeah,
like crashing a high school reunion and she was the only one who showed up.
that's right. And it's just the way that she goes through the game and the way she appears and things that she does. I just don't think she's real. I think maybe the only one might be Sybil, for
Uh,
sure.
I'm on the fence for Michelle just because of the fact, like, here's my theory. Like, I think they're real people. How Harry sees them is because it's affected by, Cheryl's psyche. So, like, they're still there, they're present, but how he interprets how they dress, how he views how they react to him, like how he feels interacting with them, really depends on just what Cheryl's going through. So what he's seeing may not actually be what's happening.
Right. It's the whatever Cheryl that you're playing as through the psychological questionnaires and the way you act in the game.
Yes.
And
And
this is all based on a theory, I should say. It's not like the game says this is a matter of fact, but I think that's what's going on.
yes. And I do think part of me really feels Michelle is like one of the real people he interacts with, just because there's so many moving parts, and we do end up seeing her fiance that she talks about for a good portion of the game, John. It's kind of a narrative thing where it's kind of setting up like the idea of a couple, and over there's a lot of discussion about relationships and like the nature of a healthy relationship versus an unhealthy relationship. And Cheryl, of course, would be very fixated on that because of her parents' divorce.
Right.
And I think it's just kind of establishing that theme about, marriages falling apart and relationships falling apart. I don't know. I think Lisa was the only one where I just really have a hard time placing because I find it hard to believe that an actual nurse would be dumb enough to be like, you know what? I just had a concussion. I'm going to take a nap.
Yeah, or when she trusts somebody else to give her medication instead of just getting it herself.
And not recognizing when if he gives her the wrong pill.
Because I think that doesn't she die because of that or something?
She dies regardless.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that whole section, because Lisa's fated to again bleed from the face and die, and Sybil ends up like walking in at the worst time and thinking Harry killed her. It's supposed to be about blame. Where does one place the blame in situations like these, which would coincide with Cheryl placing the blame on herself for her dad dying in that car crash because she, quote unquote, caused the divorce. Made him leave, which, had they never gotten divorced, he never would have been in that car.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like the big separation between this game and the first game is those characters, the fact that it's Cheryl in the psychologist's office, the way the town is, and the fact that you can't experience combat, even though you do visit some of the same locales that you do in the first game, including, I think you go to the amusement park as well, and the lake, everything. I mean, it's all there. It's just done completely differently. It's reimagined.
You go through the amusement park, it goes all the way up to the lighthouse, which in this continuity, it is a clinic run by Dr. K, aka Dr. Kaufman.
I think the biggest thing I've seen people say they hate, and we should touch on this, is if you're not, shall we say, like in a walking simulator, because generally the only thing you're doing when you're not running for your life is you're just walking to the next location, because this game is extremely linear. There are a couple places where you can go down like separate routes, but you'll end up at the same destination.
Yeah, it's very exploration heavy because you can go through the game like it's got a bit of a collectathon thing to it because you're collecting mementos like throughout the game, and sometimes you kind of have to stray from the main path and you're like, oh, what's in this box? Oh, sweet, like an item that's tied to Cheryl's memory for something that meant a lot to her. Or occasionally you'll find phone messages because you can intercept like memories from other events and other people, or sometimes they're still tied to Cheryl, that leaves voicemails and pictures and text messages, pertaining to the themes in the game.
Yeah, or things that have happened in the town, like histories and forgotten like deaths and so on and so forth. But generally, like even if you come across a locked door that you need to find a key for in this game, the key is about 5 feet away. It's just right there somewhere. So the level of exploration kind of on the main path of the game isn't really diverse. It's, like I said, super linear. And then when you get to those chase scenes that people hated a lot, again, because you can't fight, there's no combat, you're just running for your life. There's certain things in it, like you can pick up a flare, which basically gives you invincibility for, I want to say, 10 to 20 seconds. The paths that you have to go down apparently people said they were confusing, but when I played it, I literally just went straight every time. Like if I was like, oh, I went through a door and there's a wall in front of me, I just turned until I thought I could find another path and then went straight.
Most of them work that way, especially if you're the type of person who knows to pay attention to like set design. Because I know when you're at the lodge, when you go all the way out to the lodge, there's like a series of lanterns. So you basically just have to follow the lights and they'll kind of lead you in the right direction.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean by like generally I went straight, but
there is like a roadblock in the middle of the game, and it's the hospital section because you get this great sequence. Sybil fishes you out of the lake or the river, and like you had to get a change of clothes, and she's wheelchairing you throughout the hospital. And right as she's about to let on something she just found out about you, she freezes, because that's how this game, like Harry's trying to figure out the truth, what's going on, where his daughter is and stuff. And every time he gets close to learning the nature of who he is and the fact that he died, everything freezes. He gets blocked from the truth because Cheryl wants to keep things frozen. She doesn't want things to move.
Right. And that's its interpretation of transitioning from regular Silent Hill to like nowhere, basically.
Yeah, to icy Silent Hill. And so anyway, like Sybil's wheeling him through the hallway and she literally gets frozen mid-sentence and his wheelchair just keeps going and he has to wheelchair out of this hospital. It's a cool sequence, kind of tacky because it's like quick time event, but once he gets out of the hospital, then you have to like navigate around this frozen fucking train yard and the hospital hallways. It was kind of a mess. I didn't care for that section just because of how labyrinth like it was and how confusing it is, because you don't really get a chance to stop and look at the map because they are on your ass all the time.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that as you go on, those sections do get more perverse. You do have to pay attention to what's going on, and you actually do have a map in your cell phone, but stopping to look at it and knowing where a safe zone is can be a little bit formidable, I guess, even though the game isn't really that difficult.
Because it's in real time.
Yeah, but it's in real time and you do have to figure that shit out. But there's also these things, like most of the time the doors are lit up blue that you have to run through, or you can run through. But there are also these little like beams in the way and you have to crawl underneath them to get to a different area. And sometimes if you don't notice it, you could just be running past it constantly over and over again.
Yeah, there are obstacles you can grab off the wall and throw down, like shelves, boilers, whatever, and like you can impede their progress. And you could even hide. It was a feature they showed off a lot, but I never quite utilized it enough in the game. Like I never felt the need to hide.
Yeah, I don't know what the point of it was. Can you check your map when you're hiding? I didn't try that.
No.
Okay. Well, that's stupid.
I know if they see you go in the locker and hide, though, they will pull you out.
Okay. All right. Well, I would say that for the most part, like I want to say 70% of those chases I didn't have a problem with, but when you do get to the train yard one and then the last one of the game especially, those ones were a bitch. And the biggest gripe I had with the last one is because you kind of almost have to know what the puzzle's asking of you. You have to realize it's a puzzle because you have to run a certain way, a certain route through this. It's almost like PT. You're just running through the same area over and over again until you figure out which doors and stuff you have to go through, and it's so confusing.
Yeah, the last one wasn't too big of a problem with me because that one was just following the chunks of ice, at least compared to the hospital, because again, that one I died like I shouldn't say die, I got taken out like 5 times, and then I finally was able to trace just enough of a path where I could figure out, okay, this is a door I haven't gone through yet. It's not perfect. I won't lie. Like I can understand why people are frustrated with the combat in this game, what little of it there is. But I do think overall the game, it's very fixated on the story. It has a story it really wants to tell, and I really dig that, you know?
Yeah, I would say that's its biggest. That's the reason for playing it, is for that story. I wouldn't say it's for the gameplay.
No, and I think the reason I identify with this story so much is because the horror cuts closer to home, because as opposed to like fighting a demon god, you know, this one, it's a much more relatable experience of someone having to come to terms with who their parent was and that weird disassociation, or that weird moment we all have as adults where we realize our parents aren't these infallible beings who know everything and can save us no matter what. They're flawed human beings.
Right. Because I know when I came to that realization, I was in like my mid-20s when I finally just let myself kind of see my parents for who they are. And I was just thinking like, man, you know, the intelligence level and just how high I put my parents on a pedestal, and then later on realizing, oh no, they don't belong that high up there. You know, it really is like one of the biggest parts of your life that you're going to experience when you even with your friends. Sometimes this happens when you're like, oh, they're not as great as I thought they were, you know,
right?
Or they let me down more than I cared to let my mind notice, stuff like that. It's a part of life. It's a big proponent of life that the game, I would say, does very exceptionally well through the narrative.
Yeah, I thought it really pushed the envelope, and it was they tried something new. They may not have had the best budget, they may have not had the strongest hardware, but they at least tried to do something that was different and out there, and not, another Silent Hill where protagonist with a dark past. I mean, there's a dark past to be explored in this, but it's like it feels like a really for something that's based off of a pre-existing Silent Hill story. I feel like it actually cut it in a new way where it's like, oh wow, this wasn't a waste of time.
Yeah, it's a little fresh in that department. The some of the puzzles in the game, aside from the running sequences, I thought were done exceptionally well on the Wii. I remember having a lot of fun with them, and that's one of the biggest draws for owning this game on the Wii, was that you could interact with things or feel like it before now when we have like VR basically.
Yeah, I liked being able to pick up cans and shake them out and get keys out of them. I liked. There's a lot of them that are kind of, it's weird. They're like based on voicemails and stuff. Like you get a voicemail and it's kind of gives you like an auditory clue, or it gives you like a hint on what you need to explore. I'd say the most complex one that I ended up liking was at the Otherworld High School, where your exit is blocked by three ice statues of three girls, and you have to go around snapping pictures of these scandalous gossip moments throughout the school, which, spoiler alert, all turn out to be tied to Cheryl. Like, they take pictures of her in the shower, and they take pictures of her with the teacher. It turns out she may have unfortunately got a little too close to a teacher.
Yep. And like even the exploration of the high school, again, because this game is pretty limited in what it could do. Like if you go back to that first game, the high school, or I should just say the school, is expansive. It's got a basement. It's got different varying levels to it. It's got a courtyard where the main puzzle happens, basically. This one, it has varying levels, but there's not really much to do in them. And that goes back to, while this does feel like it's kind of like a AAA game on the Wii, when you're going through these areas, there's not really much to interact with aside from the puzzles.
I'll chalk that up to Konami falling for a case of I know that, the last few games sold really well, but we need to figure out how to do this cheaper. So figure it out.
Yeah, and every company has that. Like when Resident Evil became so popular, Capcom's like, well, let's just make a bunch of shit fucking games because they'll sell because they have a Resident Evil name on them.
Right.
I would say that overall, when people go into this game, I mean, they have to look at it for what it is, and I don't hate it. I don't hate this game at all. In fact, I think it's one of the better non-Team Silent Hills.
Absolutely. I consider it a bit of a hidden gem. Again, I love the nuance in the story. I love how all of the characters contradict their counterparts if they had them in the original game. Lisa, she's still, I'd say she's probably the most consistent in the whole, she seems like this great person, but you clip her wings and again, she's a flawed person. Dahlia, you would think that she's, this big, horrible, mom, but it turns out she's just a single mom now single mom who was just doing her best to help raise Cheryl, and Cheryl didn't fully appreciate it and put some of the blame from the divorce on her. Dr. Kaufman, going from being this scheming, organized, calculating businessman to a therapist that's just trying desperately to get through to Cheryl because she's very much in trouble. I think the therapy in this game is supposed to be court appointed because of she stabbed someone in a mall. That was what those flashbacks were pertaining to, because you get like messages and stuff pertaining to a security guard that got stabbed, and then you get a picture later from Sybil when you're on the lake. You're like, is this your precious missing 7-year-old? And it's Cheryl, like in a police lineup.
I was a little surprised by the fact that you do go to Toluca Mall in this game, which harbors back to that.
Again, just seeing the contrast of Harry, between the original game, and I spoke about it on that episode. I love the lengths he goes to as a dad in the original story. And I think the Harry that we have in this game is the perfect foil to that, because again, he means well. He always means well, but he's more grounded. He's more human. Depending on what ending you get, he could very much a flawed, like I guess it really varies on the level of how flawed he is. Personally, I think all the endings are actually canon, with the exception of the UFO one, just because it makes sense that maybe if Dahlia was a bit overbearing and kind of abusive to him, maybe he turned to drinking and sex, and they just at some point realized they were really toxic for each other, and they ended up having to get the divorce. And he did, take a moment to set Cheryl aside and let her know, like, hey, this isn't on you. This isn't because of you. We still love you. Just because we don't love each other, it doesn't change that we love you.
The usual combatant situations do devolve into that during divorce. It did with my parents as well when they got divorced. I do want to say, though, that I think, given the fact that there's always different endings in a Silent Hill game, you are allowed to say that, whatever ending, you get, or whatever ending you feel is the actual ending. I mean, you can accept that as your canon. One thing I've always been an advocate for, and Chavez knows this so much because I've said it so many times, is choose your own canon. Don't let the company choose it for you. Whatever makes you happy about that, you choose it. In the case of Silent Hill, I feel like whether you choose the UFO ending or the Wicked and whatever ending, the drunk dad ending in this.
Wicked and Weak, Sleaze and Sirens, Drunk Dad, Love Lost. They're all alliterations. It's weird.
Yeah. And whatever one you choose, at the end of the day, if you're happy with that, then pick that as your ending. But also, I think on the side note of that, you could deduce, like, well, actually, this ending is probably the ending that the game really ended on. Like, I know you could do that with Silent Hill 2. Chava and I had a long discussion about those endings and came to the conclusion, which we'll save for that episode, but I think you can do that as well. So I think there's varying levels on why you would choose different endings in a Silent Hill game anyway.
While we're on the subject of canon, like the story's canon status, I will also add one of the creators for it actually stipulated, he's like, you could even spin it like this game is a spin-off of Silent Hill 1's bad ending, which I think is his own personal take on it. I like it. It's just like, yeah, that'd be kind of interesting. You play the first one, you get the worst ending, and then it turns out he died. Cheryl was okay though, but she didn't take it so well, so she crafted her own version of events.
Right. And then just go ahead and play Shattered Memories, and there you are.
Yeah, there you got your own complete Silent Hill collection there, just 2 games.
Yeah.
I think I've managed to get all of the endings, but I gotta say it's actually kind of tricky. Like it's not like the other Silent Hill games where it's like, okay, well, if I do this task, this will unlock this, or if I do this, it'll do this. It's like you really have to be careful how long you look at something, how you answer the questions, how you respond to certain events. That's the real game for me, I guess. It's not the combat, it's literally how you act.
I guess could be a detriment in people's eyes, considering that like when you get to Silent Hill 2, combat, puzzles, how you act, what you do, all of it factors into your ending.
Yes.
I would say you're right in that regard, because there is no combat in this game.
No, it's more of letting the game, as the psychological warning says at the beginning, the game will play you as much as you play it.
This is probably the biggest question that I think we should answer. At the end of the day, Silent Hill games are supposed to be scary narratives, scary experiences because of the atmosphere. Would you say that this game was scary at all?
I will say the chase sequences, especially the very first time I played it, they can be pulse pounding. Like, it's adrenaline. I don't know. It's really hard because not much scares me these days. And when I play a Silent Hill game, it's not so much for the terror, although they do unsettle the hell out of me.
Yeah.
It's the drama, actually, because the drama in these games is so fucking well done. Like, the first game, you know, again, bizarro 70s horror, like it scares me. It's scares me enough. It's atmospheric, and the story's got a good mystery to it. And I feel like the context for it, the dramatic context, is actually added with Silent Hill 3, but I'll touch on that when we get to it. And Silent Hill 2, of course, you have this whole story, you know, with James and losing his wife and complicated grief, and it's just, yeah, that's the meat of the series for me. It's not so much that, oh my god, jump scare, oh, it's just a cat. It's more like these characters and how they make you care about them, or at least care enough about what they did.
Well, I mean, that is the meat and potatoes, but overall, generally the reason they're made is because they're supposed to be horror games.
On the surface, yes.
On the surface. And I just don't think that, I think that the first three games accomplish that 100%. This one, however, if people are hearing this and they want to go and play it and they're worried about being afraid, like you said, pulse pounding, I would agree. But horror, no, it didn't scare me at all.
Let me say it. Let me try to put it this way. If it was a flavor, it would be domestic horror. I know where you thought I was going with that. I'm not doing it, but it would be domestic horror, because it's the horrible things that happen in real life. You know, divorce can be messy and horrible and traumatic for children. Losing a parent, you know, at 7 years old can be incredibly traumatic for a child. And the aftermath and coping with all of that stuff, like if you pay attention to a lot of the stuff, because a lot of those texts were about Cheryl in the game.
Yeah, and her experiences.
There's a lot of traumas that she had after that. You know, she got she got drugged at a party and taken advantage of and left naked in the snow. She got dumped by a boyfriend because she was considered too frigid, because she couldn't open up because of, you know, the loss she suffered as a child. She may or may not have had an affair with the teacher and possibly even dipped into prostitution. She stabbed a security guard who was nice and was just trying to help her, you know, because she was lashing out and rebelling and she didn't know how to cope. Like, that's all horrifying, horrible stuff. It's just a different type of horror. It's not, you know, a bloody nurse with a parasite on her back lurching towards you with scalpel.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing worse than, you know, a girl covering up her face and letting her cleavage hang out. It's just awful. And skimpy nurse outfits, just terrifying. You know?
I'm sure you were just fucking absolutely just frozen in terror.
To be honest, the first time I played Silent Hill 2, I was literally shaking while playing it. That game scared the shit out of me, but we'll get to that another time.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, generally, I just want to say in conclusion that I really don't hate this game. Going into it, I guess because my experience is a little weird going into it not knowing it was meant to be a reimagining, I thought it was just a new Silent Hill game, and I was taking it on the face of that when I went through it. Yeah, and then when I came to find out, oh, it's a retelling, then I guess I didn't have those, you know, feelings to harbor against it on the offset because I just didn't know. So my experience might be a little bit different from other people's in the fact that I didn't feel a need to hate this game.
I never hated this game, and I don't think I ever will. If anything, I've grown to appreciate it even more over time. It feels in some parts like a brand new experience, and others it feels like a love letter to a lot of the characters from the original game. You know, it's really amazing to see them from all these other different aspects and different angles and recontextualizing everything to tell, you know, a dramatic at times heartbreaking story, and especially for a Wii title. And I will say, if you guys can ever find a copy, and unfortunately Silent Hill games are getting rather expensive these days, go for the Wii one if you can, because it is the most immersive, best sounding version. PS2 is definitely, if you have like motor issues and you need something that's a little more accessible, the PS2 would be the next best step, because the controller is easier to handle than the Wiimote. Oh, and one last thing I want to touch on, because it'd be a crime not to talk about this in a Silent Hill video. The soundtrack is fucking amazing.
It's one of the best Silent Hill, in terms of having Mary Elizabeth McGlynn and Akira making music and singing together. It is one of the best in quality.
We get our first main theme that's a cover of a pre-existing song. It's a cover of, I think, Willie Nelson's Always on My Mind. Or maybe I forget who holds the rights to the song, but yeah, it's a cover. It's great. Unfortunately, it's not on the Spotify version of the soundtrack because of licensing reasons, but it's on YouTube. Give it a listen. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, Hell Frozen Rain, all the fucking songs are amazing. Don't skip a single one. They're so good. I used to actually just drive, like, for a whole year everywhere I drove. I just listened to the soundtrack on repeat.
Yeah, that was the reason I pre-ordered the game, because when you pre-ordered the Wii version and I think the PS2 version, you got a copy of the soundtrack, and it's worth it. It was definitely, it's still in my collection and I'm never getting rid of it.
Yeah.
Some people kind of say Akira gets a bit too sample heavy in it, but honestly, the score, it's really great. It feels kind of like a colder industrial feel, so it in itself, it's almost a homage to the original game soundtrack in its own way.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I don't think anyone should be surprised that the best part of this game is the soundtrack, because of course it's the best part of any Silent Hill game that Akira is attached to.
Fair warning. I mean, I'm sure the game's been pretty much spoiled for anyone who hasn't played it, who's listening to this now, but just try not to listen too hard to the lyrics, because they do give away a lot of the game's ending twist.
I think anyone can agree that the first game just has more. It's the better game.
I can't even really say better or worse. It's like apples and oranges. They're just two different games.
But I mean, if you had to choose, like if you had to play one of them over and over again, I think it would be the first one, right?
Yeah. Just because the puzzles are a little more engaging, and plus there's a whole series attached to the original that I also love dearly.
But I just think the first one, being able to run around the town, you're not on a linear path exactly. Being able to explore, fighting many different enemies, actually be able to fighting. There's just so much more to it in terms of depth of gameplay that I'd just rather play the first one than this one. But
yeah,
again, I don't hate this game. It's just that when I think about it, I think of how limited it is in the things you can do. And if you know where you're going, especially, then it really just, it's kind of, I don't want to say bland, but it's just kind of so straightforward in terms of gameplay.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. I do love this game dearly. The only thing I regret is that I feel like we lost out on two good Silent Hill games for this one. Mm-hmm. I really would have liked to have had that remake, and I actually would have liked to have played Silent Hill Cold Heart, because I feel like, again, a lot of its DNA got incorporated into this game, and I liked a lot of what I saw.
Yeah, and, you know, as we all know it, Silent Hill is pretty much dead at this moment. There are fan remakes going on. There's a lot of quality stuff going on in terms of fan content.
Quality snowboards from Konami.
Konami's trying to sell anything with their IPs on it just to earn a couple scraps of dollars. I don't know why. It's so stupid. But play this game if you haven't. We really, even with us spoiling it, I still think it's worth going through. In terms of what's coming next, because we also have covered Silent Hill 1 on the channel here. We will be doing the other Silent Hill games at some point, but what's coming after this episode is going to be obscure the game and obscure the aftermath. It's going to be a double feature. We're going to cover both those games. One of them is a Wii title, and the other one PS2 only.
No. So the original was PS2, Xbox, PC. The other one was PC, PS2. I think the Xbox port actually got scrapped. Wii, PSP. It was a whore. It just got ported all around.
Oh yeah, and we are definitely going to explore why that is when we talk about it. But I just want to thank everyone for listening. Do you have anything else to say before we take off, Chava?
Thanks for listening, and yeah, keep looking for those Silent Hill games, guys. Like, play them if you can get a chance. Trust me, they still hold up. They're still worth it.
And when we do return with a Silent Hill game, if I can get Chavo to play it, I really would like to talk about Downpour. Well, it's still fresh in my mind.
Yeah, no, that's definitely on my list, and that's one I actually want to play. The only one I'm dreading is Homecoming. Fuck that game.
Oh man, yeah, that's another whole conversation. It's pretty bad. But yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Stay tuned for more to come.
Later.